Hello and welcome to another episode of Dixon Cox, where me, Nick Dixon, and Paul Cox go through the week's news from a light-hearted perspective. Though it will be quite serious this week because we have Keir Starmer threatening to deploy British troops to secure the Ukraine peace deal. We've got Zelensky calling for an EU army, or at least an army of Europe. So we're going to talk about what all that's going to look like, and me and Paul are going to break it down as experts in geopolitics, and we'll solve that whole situation. We're going to talk about JD Vance's speech. May seem like slightly old news, but this is a weekly roundup, and I think it's still very interesting. We might talk about Ashley St. Clair having a baby with Elon Musk just because it's funny. And we might talk about Fraser Nelson if we get onto it, saying that Rishi Sunak is English. And of course, Peak Woke, which is backed by popular demand, where we go through the wokest stories of the week. Even though woke is basically over, we exist in woke North Korea, as Morgoth puts it. So in Britain, is unfortunately still plenty of woke week stories. Woke weekly stories every week. That's what I was trying to say. Very, very
On a
slick.
weekly basis.
On a weekly basis. And if you want the full version, of course, go to nickdixon.net if you like this type of thing, where we have the full versions. We also have a new podcast with me and Paul just talking about existential life questions. We're venturing out into the self-help arena. It's called Dixon Cots Go Mental. And people have loved the first episode. So, if you like me and Paul talking about stuff other than politics, well, you may not know if you like it yet, but we're pretty sure you will. Go to nickdixon.net. And of course, I have all my interviews with Carl Benjamin, Academic Agent, Lord Frost, Ben Habib, people like this also on the site. And I will do more interviews soon. Please stop shouting at me. Claire Fox said the other day you should interview me, so that's giving me a push to get back and do the interviews. So we'll be doing that again soon as well, all on nickdixon.net. But Paul, I wanted to get straight into it, news style, like an efficient news show, and ask you about this Starmer troops thing. So he's put out a statement, classically looking down at his notes constantly. I'm very confident in my speaking. This is why I have to look at my notes every third word. And he says he's prepared to deploy British troops, but only if there's a US backstop. But Pete Hegseth has made it clear that any troops would not be backed by Article 5. So then you go, what's Starmer on about? Does Article 5 even hold any weight? Some commentators, military people, think that NATO is sort of a myth at this point anyway. I mean, would anything really happen? So for some reason, Starmer wants to go in. It's us and the French, and for some reason, the Swedes. Germany said it won't deploy troops, and it said it's all far too premature. And Olaf Scholz is actively annoyed about it, and even was prepared to walk out of the meeting and tell the press this is irritating. So for some reason, Starmer's got all jingoistic on this whole. Even though he's talking about securing the peace, he's very kind of like, we'll deploy troops. Do we have the troops? Why is Starmer so keen to do this?
Well, direct answer to that question is I think he's quite desperate. He's failing at home politically. His popularity's gone through the floor. They fixed the floor. He went through the floor again. They fixed that, and then he went through the floor again.
Like in a movie where someone's just falling through multiple layers.
Like Tom and Jerry, just keeps going through the floor, and he hasn't stopped yet. And I don't think he will stop until they get rid of him. But they won't get rid of him yet because they're just incapable of understanding how it's impacting the Labour Party. But that's for another day. So I think he's quite desperate. I think he feels that he has to do something, be seen to do something. And I think, quite frankly, he's embarrassed himself in the last few days. And there's no other way to put it. Coming out on Sunday, Monday evening and saying, I'm willing to put troops in Ukraine as a direct retort to discovering that Trump had spoken to Putin was nothing better than a knee-jerk reaction politically. Absolutely. There was no need for it. I mean, they can have those discussions. Nobody needed to hear that. And of course, it opened up all sorts of questions. If he was here now, and I'm glad he's not, but if he was here now, he'd say, "Oh, none of this would happen until there was some sort of peace agreement, and then we'd just be policing the borders of Ukraine." Well, that is a massive step. Even if it's just that, that's a massive step. We are not in a position. We're not in a military position, let alone a financial position, to support a war in Europe. There is no call for a war in Europe, and any talk of a European army has been torpedoed this week by Keir Starmer, basically trying to rush everybody together for a summit in Paris yesterday, which, as you've already pointed out, ended in just it was a damp squib. He's the only one who'd come out. That's why you can hear the shuffling of his papers in the speech. He was the only one willing to speak. Like you say, Germany had already walked out. Poland has said we're having nothing to do with this. Sweden were like, we might do. And everybody else said, this is way too early. Why are we doing this now? I think it's an embarrassment, Nick.
Except France. And weirdly, Britain and France are arguably two countries who are doing the worst domestically. We have a lot of very similar problems. We have
We
immigration,
do.
Islamic extremism. Their party politics is an even more of a mess than ours. That might happen to us maybe in 2029, but we're both a mess. And we're the two ones saying, yeah, we want to go into this war. And of course, that does make it somewhat reminiscent of World War II. But I think this is a big mistake that people think everything is World War II. My theory on it is we just can't accept that we're not this major power. We've got this Churchillian strain. People like Boris always obsessed with that. Because was Boris obsessed with Ukraine, and so is Starmer. Because I would say that Starmer is obsessed with being a European, because he said in his little speech, as Europeans, we have to step up. He says, Trump wants Europe to do more, and we should. So he's obsessed with being a European and sort of edging us back towards the EU. But Boris was into it for different reasons, which is this sort of jingoism, this Churchillian strain of thinking we're a major power. And I think a lot of it comes from there. Someone like Peter Hitchens would say we need to accept that we're not. We haven't been since the Suez Crisis exposed us, in 1956 as not serious. We'd already lost our empire. It was clear that we couldn't act without America militarily. In that case, Eisenhower threatened us by saying he'd sell American bonds that were in sterling, and so we can't something about us. And I admire it in some ways, but it's also foolish. We
Well,
can't just be Switzerland or something. Like I was saying to you the other day, why can't we just say we're strong on financial services? We're an island. We'll just be a little just financial island. Just we don't get involved in anything. But we can't. It doesn't seem to be in our character to just be a big bank like Switzerland.
no, I mean, we did have a the biggest empire um, of modern history, Nick. So we're slightly different to Switzerland, but you're right. I mean, we're in a similar position to Switzerland in that we would struggle to defend ourselves. Boris Johnson, by the way, was just trying to create a legacy. Um, I don't see it as anything else. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that Boris Johnson doesn't believe in Ukraine and the Ukrainian sovereignty and supporting Ukraine over Russia. I'm sure he believes those things. But the way he went about it and foisted himself upon the situation, even after he'd been ousted as prime minister, said to me that he was just trying to carve out a legacy, and perhaps still is to some degree. Keir Starmer is unlikely to ever have a legacy. I mean, I think that he'll be known as, at best, the most uninspiring prime minister of all time. And considering that Liz Truss had 49 days, that's saying something. At least within Liz's, don't know her personally, Liz's 49 days, she attempted something quite radical. All Keir Starmer has done, although it is quite radical, is basically proven to the whole country that he is anti-Britain. And what's happened this week has proved that also. This is not pro-Britain. This is pro-Europe. He's seen this as, you could tell yesterday, before he said that we need the US to have a backstop, for the backstop, which is basically saying, oh, yeah, we don't like what Trump's doing, but we need him. He pointed out that Trump had said that Europe need to stand on their own 2 feet financially and as a military, and they need to support themselves. And he's saying this is in reaction to that, like it's a positive. It's not. It's a childish reaction to that. So I think that Keir Starmer sees this as a way of getting Europe around the table and saying to these people, we're still as much a part of Europe as we were before 2020/2016. We're not. The European war on the war on the European border is not a war on the UK border. It geographically isn't, and it isn't in any other way either. We wouldn't have to. You don't have to. However, there's NATO's a big part of this, right? So what's happened is Trump has decided he wants to start negotiations, and as part of those negotiations, obviously he's had discussions with Putin, and I'm sure he will with Zelensky too. But he's already setting the boundaries, okay, and within that suggests that Ukraine would be given wouldn't necessarily be given territory back, and one huge red line is they wouldn't be able to join NATO. So there wouldn't be this one for all and all for one business. So some people are arguing that if Starmer put troops on the Ukraine-Russian border and someone shot British troops, there wouldn't be a need, therefore, to defend for everybody to come together and defend that. And that would just leave us stood alone. So not only would
Well, yeah.
Starmer be putting our boys and girls in harm's way, were they to be immediately killed by Russia because they saw that as an offensive in some way, we wouldn't necessarily legally have the backing of Europe or America. We'd just be alone, and we just cannot afford to be in that position.
No.
Starmer does not know what he's doing here. He thinks it's not just Starmer, by the way. It's Ed Davey, and we'll get onto that. Ed Davey watch is going to be pretty serious this week. I think that they're well outside their remit, and they're well out their depth at the moment, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, the British troops will be sitting ducks. That's why he needs the US backstop. But now, if he got it in some sort of Starmer world, some hypothetical world where he's brilliant, he would go over to Trump, get Hegseth and Trump to change their minds, get them to back our troops, get Germany on board, and he's like the hero. Maybe that's what he's thinking. I mean, obviously, he's also trying to stay relevant because Trump's just unilaterally said, right, I'm speaking to Putin, I'm ending this, and everyone's now trying to catch up. But Schultz is saying, well, let's wait and see, which is far more sensible than what Starmer's doing. So I'm not sure. I think, everyone's trying to catch up with Trump and stay relevant.
Yeah.
And as to the troops themselves, there was a good piece here it was a good piece about a lot of these topics in the Telegraph from Roland Oliphant, and he was talking about the troops and how many we actually have, and it would require something like 40,000. I mean, Lord Dannett was saying this. If we were to deploy 10,000 troops each rotation for 6 months, that would effectively tie up 30 to 40,000 troops, and we just haven't got that number available. And he talked about the last time we did something like this was the British Army of the Rhine, who at their height deployed 80,000 in the 1950s. But that's when there were 350,000 regular British soldiers and almost 500,000 in total. So now they reckon there's about 74,000 regular soldiers and 900 are in Estonia, apparently. So imagine where are we going to get these people from? We don't have the numbers. So that's another reason it's crazy. So you do wonder what Starmer is up to. And people are welcome to suggest things in the comments as long as you don't insult me because then you'll get blocked. But because we're not experts on this, my expertise, of course, is Man United and Shaka Demus and Pliers. So I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I'm just wondering what Starmer's up to. And maybe we can go on to this. Go on.
I'm just very quickly going to say that there is an argument that a pro-Starmer argument that Starmer is on the front foot. But I would ask, if so, on the front foot for what? Because we already support Ukraine. We didn't need to declare our support for Ukraine. It was already there. So, okay,
well, it's
so we're on the front foot. We don't need to be. We don't need to be aggressive. We don't need to say, well, because Trump's talking to Putin, we all need to get together as Europe. And do you know what? We're going to put troops in Ukraine. That is a massive escalation. So I don't think that puts you on the front foot. I think it puts you on the back foot.
Yeah, and it's very strange because he'd also said before all this, Starmer, that Ukraine was on an irreversible path to NATO membership. And that's one of the key things that Putin says must not happen and that pretty much everyone has said won't happen. So I don't know why Starmer's saying that either.
Biden administration said it was very unlikely that Ukraine would join NATO. Biden, who gave $3 trillion to Ukraine. Yeah. So there's a lot being forgotten as part of the rhetoric this week.
They just don't want to admit that they've lost, basically. I mean, I don't want to be... See, if you talk dispassionately about this war, you're seen as some sort of traitor. Everyone's going to have their flag in their bio and all that. And it's like, no, Putin's won. He's got some territory. Now he's doing a deal with Trump, and that's what probably what he wanted. And maybe he'll be back in the future, of course. But it's like, it's all cope. Just saying, we're still going to put in troops and all this. It's just like, you've lost. But and no one wants to say that. I think
that's really interesting, Nick. Sorry, because I think that's really interesting. And I think some of our listeners and viewers, I think that's very interesting to say that Putin and Russia have won, because what we've seen within our mainstream media, at least, and beyond independent media within the West, it's only in small enclaves that anyone thinks that anyone has really propagated this whole idea that Russia are winning. Mostly we've been told how fabulous Ukraine have been doing in defending against Russia. They've obviously lost quite a lot of land, and they'd already lost Crimea and other parts of the Donetsk region in 2014. more of this is going to come out because I don't disagree with you, Nick. I think it will come as a shock to quite a few people that Russia will be seen as winners in this
Well, they
because
can give their own take. I'm not a military expert like Leo, but people can talk about it was harder than Putin thought. His army was a bit more rubbish than he thought, and so on. But just in terms of numbers and the reality, if he's now negotiating with Trump and they agree that he's got this percentage of territory that he wanted, in that sense he's won. Isn't he? It depends on what borders or what lines are agreed. That's what it seems like to me, anyway. But people can say I'm wrong as long as they do it respectfully. Um, the because my dispassionate block, I'll just simply dispassionately
go
block
on,
you.
go
My
on.
channel is a dictatorship. Um,
Yeah,
but there's a couple of things I wanted to say, and then we'll move on to the wider topic. But one is when I talked about this on Twitter, people were also keen to point out Starmer's hypocrisy about the border. I think that's a reasonable point. We can't secure our own border. Yeah, he's obsessed with the border in Eastern Europe. It's like, what are you doing? We don't have a border. So there is that. And that ties into the domestic mess of England and Britain and France being the most keen to go in and set up troops. And they're the most, you know, falling apart domestically, probably of any of these countries. Poland are being very shrewd. They're building their economy. People say they're going to be bigger than us economically by 2030 and all that. They're just focusing on that. They don't want to get involved. But they'd have to get involved, and Germany would have to get involved. So I don't know. Um, so on the wider question, though, I thought his piece was very interesting from Oliphant in the Telegraph because it was about this future multipolar world. This is how Ukraine's war end, but Trump's plan for what comes next is even more radical. And it was about this question that the US, the argument is the US may have accepted no longer being the sole superpower. And now what they're doing instead is looking at this multipolar world, and Rubio even used the term, which previously is never a term they would have used, apparently. And the argument here is they're accepting it's going to be China, Russia, and US. That's the new world. But so how much territory can we get instead of just, the former America was, we're so powerful, we're going to go off and have pointless wars in various deserts. Now it's like, okay, what can we do? We can get Greenland, we'll get the Panama Canal, we can get Canada, maybe through tariffs if we don't literally invade. They're consolidating and expanding their territory and seeing it in a much more sort of hard, realistic way where they're one of three people competing, three major powers. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not true, and we'll end up with America getting dragged back into this Ukraine thing, and it will just be like World War II, and they can't stay out of it. But for now, they seem to want to stay out of Europe and get on with their own building their own territory against China and Russia. What do you think to that as a broad idea?
yeah. I think that's certainly something I took from Oliphant's uh, article as well. Although I thought he wrote it slightly in anger. Actually, I think the uh, whether he meant it or not, the emotion that came from the article for me was one of anger, and I can see why people are angry, particularly with Trump talking to Putin before he's spoken to Zelensky. However, none of this is a surprise. As always, Trump told us he was going to do this. He didn't just tell us he was going to do it. He told the 300 plus million Americans this is what he was going to do, and that is the mandate on which he was overwhelmingly voted in to achieve. So
America first.
there is absolutely no surprises here whatsoever. I think, and it feels like 2016, 2017 again, where we say things like, I think people are surprised that a politician is doing something they said they would do. Trump
Right.
has just spent, no, he did, sorry, he did spend the first 4 years of his presidency doing exactly what he said he would do until COVID come along. And now in his second presidency, after this, catastrophe of a presidency under Joe Biden, who unfortunately, and I say unfortunately with great humanity, became a very, very old man in the process of those 4 years and wasn't cognitively um, of the right ability to lead the most powerful country in the world, and of course that gap just gave Trump so much vigor, and he's come back with a huge mandate. So, I guess my first point is yes, I agree that he is looking geopolitically and saying where does America sit in the world. But he also knows in order for them to retain either position one or two, and I'd still argue they were in position one, but to retain either one of those positions, he has to make them great again in the sense that he has to make their economy great. He has to build their he has to build their internal coffers, which we're seeing him doing. And from that position, from that platform, he can build whatever he needs to build, a stronger army, whatever it is. If they insulate themselves more than they have done, then they will be very, very powerful. Basically, under Biden and Obama, they opened up the gates and the borders in more ways than one. They opened it up to the world, and they started financing the world for all sorts of niff-naff and trivia, which wasn't serving any US purpose whatsoever. And I'm sure the rest of us in the West could take a few lessons from this. And why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we? It doesn't make it unkind to support yourself before you support anyone else. So I think that this is very strategic from Trump. And we also don't know. We just don't know what was said between Trump and Putin. We know that they've sent out what's the name of the defense secretary for the States? Oh, Hegseth.
Hegseth.
Yeah, Hegseth. So we know that Hegseth has come out and said these are broadly the red lines. We don't know that's what was discussed. We don't know anything. And I'll tell you why we don't know anything. You can tell from the reaction of the European leaders. They don't know anything. They're in panic mode. What Keir Starmer did this week, panic. What Europe as a whole did, panic. The way they reacted to a speech we're going to talk about later, panic. It's all panic because they don't know. And it's not a case that they need to know either. It's Trump that's going to be brokering this deal.
All we know is that Putin would have come in with a large dog and a very long table. That's all we know. But yeah, it's
on the phone, wasn't it? It's probably on Teams.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it was in person. He wouldn't do the large dog. That was to intimidate Merkel. He'd find out what annoyed Trump. He'd have like normal Coke instead of diet, or he'd insist on shaking his hand more than he wants. Trump actually is known for his power handshakes, and he's also known to not like handshakes and be a germphobe. He must have just got over that, or maybe washed his hands very quickly afterwards. But just on this point about the multipolar world, I mean, Hegseth was so apparently he had this speech where he said he was the United States would no longer be primarily focused on the security of Europe, but an earlier draft he had America would no longer be the primary security guarantor of Europe. So basically saying you're on your own, Europe. And then Rubio said to Megyn Kelly that it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. It was a product of the end of the Cold War, but eventually you were going to reach back to a point where you had a multipolar world, multi-great powers in different parts of the planet. So it's a massive change for America to talk like that. And the question is, what do we do as Europe and as Britain? Obviously, Starmer thinks we're all Europeans. I think we're just English. But because we're I think Mary Harrington was talking about this. We're a mid-level power who has to negotiate now. So you see that Starmer wants to be seen as sucking up to Trump. He's like, Trump's told us we have to spend more defense, and I agree, and all this. Although Lord Dannett, by the way, said that we need to get spending up to 3.5%, and that it's woefully inadequate. I think we're at 2.3 from memory now, and Starmer's saying we'll get it to 2.5. But Dannett's saying, and he's a former British Army head, he's saying we need to get it to 3.5 to touch the sides, basically. So there's that. But Starmer seems to want to suck up to Trump on a personal level. He wants to call him after being shot, which I thought was a clever move, one of Starmer's rare good moves. He wants to say, look, I'm heeding his advice about defense spending. He wants to say, oh, we're pals with Trump. But he also wants to definitely cozy up to Europe. And he also wants to keep the door open to China on business in a way that the Tories even weren't. They were like, okay, we've got to be tougher on China, under Sunak in that brief time, whereas Labour are much more open to China. But this the reality of the multipolar world and of them being a mid-level power within it, that we have to just somehow, because what we could do is just go all in and say we're with America, though you might, that would work for the Trump administration. When you get another Biden, you're like, is that so great? And you don't want to go all in with Europe because we've done Brexit. We don't want to be part of a Euro or a European army. So are we just going to be playing this juggling act now forever? And are we going to be as we've said, overplaying our hand and thinking we're more important than we are?
Oh, there's so much there. So multipolar world, I think, in my mind, we've been a multipolar world for some time anyway. Certainly in most of my lifetime, which would have been since end of 79 onwards. In the sense that, I mean, you could argue that the greatest power in the world throughout the 80s, for instance, very easily, you could argue that was the US. But in recent times, we've had, is it the BRICS agreement where you've got India, Russia, China, North Korea? I mean, that is a power. That's a
Hang on, North
consider.
Korea. Don't think they're
Just
allowed in
chucked.
that.
By the way, I just chucked that in. I just chucked it in. I thought, do you know what? They deserve it, Nick. Look, they deserve it. So you got India, China, and Russia in there, haven't you? And and
Brazil,
and pretty
China, Egypt, Ethiopia, India, Iran, Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, United Arab Emirates. It's always very hard to say. Just to give you all the
and
people in there.
and North Korea, which isn't on that list. But it bloody well should be,
They
Nick.
snuck in.
So you could argue that we've had a multipolar world for some time because, as a group, that's a very powerful group. That's not, we shouldn't, no one ever underestimates China anymore. But I think on almost a daily basis, people underestimate India. We perhaps don't think they're organised enough to get their shit together to become a major power. But economically,
Get their shit together being an unfortunate term when it comes to India. I'm so sorry. So we had a slight technical hitch there. I made a racist joke about India, and that seemed to just crash the whole thing. Actually, it was Paul's technical problems, but we don't need to, it doesn't matter about blame. Paul was in the middle. You were in the middle of an insightful point about BRICS.
Yeah, because BRICS does constitute part of this multipolar power across the world. Of course, everybody traditionally thinks about the States and China, but China also ganged up with Russia and India and some of the other countries that you mentioned. And also we've got, Europe and NATO, and they're connected to America. So in many ways it is. Of course, the big kingpins are considered America and China. In terms of the UK and where we sit in that, we are in the middle. We've been in the middle since World War II, Nick. We have this discussion quite regularly. I think it's essentially accepted that we're not. And I think people like Starmer want us to be part of Europe because they want to dilute it even further. I don't think us necessarily being part of the EU adds any strength to us, because I think we can choose to be part of the EU if we're out as a result of Brexit, and we can choose to be part of America, and we can cherry pick what's best for the UK.
I hope so. Although I sort of wonder what we have to offer on the global stage these days, except for some banking stuff and some lawyers. I don't know. Not that I'm down on Britain. I'm just down on the way we're run, and obviously all the mad boat stuff and the legal immigration. Maybe we'll get into that later if we talk about what it is to be English. But I thought we'd move on to JD Vance then. So this was a big deal, of course. The Daily Mail here: free speech is in retreat in UK, warns Trump's VP. That's just one of many headlines. And Vance basically came and stuck it to the Munich Security Conference, essentially called them all commies to their face. And I had a tweet about that. It was fairly straightforward. It got like 64,000 likes, which I don't say to boast, but to say that I think Musk might be boosting anything pro Vance. But certainly Vance was the hot topic. And the speech was very popular with the kind of people who I follow on X, but very unpopular with the kind of people he was delivering it to. I mean, that was a tough crowd. But he was saying it straight to their faces. And of course, they weren't going to like it. Some people, like, I think I've even seen Alistair Campbell do this. I've certainly seen a few people do this, talk about the response to the speech as if that somehow was damning. It's like, of course, the response in the room wouldn't be good because he was telling them all they're commie idiots to their face. That was bound to be bad. I mean, he said he referenced the Cold War repeatedly. He said that there were ugly Soviet era words like misinformation and disinformation being used. He talked about the burning of the Quran in Sweden, how the Swedish courts didn't respond appropriately. He talked about Romania cancelling an election and a former European commissioner hinting that the same thing would happen in Germany, maybe as if it was a good thing. He talked very damningly about the buffer zone silent prayer laws in Britain, which is considered quite a niche topic here, which I say is because people have been brainwashed to hate Christianity and to love abortion. But people are getting arrested for praying in their head near abortion centres. Absolutely crazy. And there's even guidance about praying in your house now from the Scottish government if it happens to be in one of these buffer zones. So it's completely insane. And as a Christian, I'm sure he was keen to call that out. And he basically said overall, you're a mess. You claim to be democratic, but you're not. You are bureaucratic authoritarians who have completely lost the plot. And I'm here to say, step it up if you want to be allies with America, basically. And he even said there's nothing more urgent than mass migration, and pointed out almost 1 in 5 people in Germany move from abroad, especially from non-EU countries. So it was just a scathing speech, and they've all responded very badly, of course. But for anyone sane, it was just obvious, wasn't it? What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most amusing things about the speech is he started off like bringing everybody together. I think we're all part of one family. Got a huge round of applause, and then he said, "I hope that's not the last round of applause I get." Him being the only one who knew what he was going to say next, and of course, the applause got less and less and less and less and less throughout, and until it was just a room full of silent communists. But
Which is
I
the best kind of
rewatched.
communist. If you're gonna have a communist, at least be silent.
At least be silent. Please be silent. Um, I rewatched today, knowing that we'd be recording the podcast. I actually heard it on the radio. I was driving when it was live, listening to GB News, also available on DAB as well as the television. And I heard the whole thing live on the radio. And of course, you're distracted slightly when you're driving. I thought I'm going to go and listen again today. I remembered some key points. I've been tweeting about it over the weekend, but I wanted to hear the whole thing. And I think, against the backdrop of this sort of free speech tyranny that we've seen across the Western world in the last 5 to 10 years, JD Vance's speech was one of the most politically important speeches of our time, Nick. And he talked very much about the threat from within, because he said, look, we are here at a defence conference, and I expect you all want to be talking about, how we can boost defence funding and how we're going to protect ourselves from external threats. But you can't protect yourself from external threats when you cannot and are not protecting yourself from internal threats. And then listed bona fide facts across Europe. Not just across Europe, across some of the most peak Western societies in Europe: France, Sweden, the United Kingdom. These places where free speech has been, it's been a sanctity of ours for a very long time, and it has been eroded under the guise of progressivism and ultra liberalism. And the people that were most responsible for leading on that seem to be the most deaf and blind to accepting anything that JD Vance has to say now as a consequence of that speech. I think I stand by it. Absolutely one of the most important speeches of our time. And the way that it's rattled the establishment across Europe tells you everything you need to know. Everything he said was true. The threat is from within, and we have allowed it. The fact that you cannot say that without getting into trouble tells you absolutely everything you need to know, Nick.
Yeah. And just a quote here in the Daily Mail when they reported on it. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making, Mr. Vance told the conference. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you, nor for that matter is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. That is scathing. I mean, yes, it is totally scathing. And what's happened in America is a counter elite has come in. It's the Trump movement combined with Silicon Valley, combined with Doge, which is all related, of course, because it's Musk and et al. Wanting to strip the government and make it more efficient. And that is pretty radical. And you see that Zuckerberg getting involved, getting on board, and Gates and even Google to some extent, all these people getting on board, and it's completely different. And he's saying to Europe, "Are you going to catch up with that?" But so far, they're saying no. I mean, there's hints that they might. The AFD, who Musk seems keen on, and obviously we've got Farage and Reform and Rupert Lowe and people knocking around who could win in 2029. Then maybe it'd be very different. But for now, the two are just starkly at odds. As he said here, the biggest threat to Europe isn't external, it's internal, as you mentioned, a retreat from its own fundamental values shared with the US. So he said, look, we've gone back to some sort of liberalism, a kind of free speech, free market approach, okay, a bit more tariffy than in the past. But on these basic questions of, I mean, things like the online safety bill, which Trump was threatening tariffs about allegedly, on things like freedom of speech, they've gone back to the American basics. There is a question of, will this new America be different? Will it be more protectionist? Will it be more isolationist? But, in this so-called multipolar world. But on these basics, they've gone back to being America. But we haven't gone back to being Europe and Britain. And we are at least free we've ever been with Starmer. It's shocking. And the examples, I think a lot of it's to do with X, as well as in people hearing British examples, the people that went to jail over Southport. There's so many examples you can cite of our sort of anarcho tyranny system. And lately, we've had this thing where a Zimbabwean paedophile, shouldn't go back because he'll be in distress in his own country. That the chicken nugget story. You can't send the Albanian back because their child doesn't like chicken nuggets. A Pakistani paedophile you can't send back because his children will unduly suffer. This mad anarcho tyranny that we see every day now. So America must look at that and go, what is going on? So you can see where the speech came from. It was a kind of culture. You could say it was a sort of culture war speech, but it was about these fundamental values. And it wasn't really about the military strategy stuff. It was about the cultural values. Anything else to add on the speech, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, lest we forget the Munich security. This is the Munich Security Conference, and the Munich Security Director was the guy that introduced Vance with a huge, proud smile on his face. It was the opening speech. He was introducing the Vice President of the United States of America to open the conference. And then just a matter of days later, he cried. He cried because J.D. Vance told him some hurty words. And
that was mental.
We simply cannot.
Hitler would be turning in his grave, Paul, watching.
He would be, yeah.
Watching what's become of Germany.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's dead. I think he still lives in Argentina, Nick.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Hitler will be watching that on his VPN on the dark web. Hitler will be gutted.
But not just Hitler. Some of the other great men of the 20th century as well, Nick. The people.
Because who cries in a speech? And what's more, as soon as he cried, did you notice they just broke out into rapturous applause just at him crying? Is that we clap that now?
It's Pavlovian, mate. We know that. But people have learned over the last 10 years. Man cries, clap, quickly clap.
Clap because he's brave.
Clap
and then some chick was hugging him.
Yeah, I mean, that used to be why you cried as a man, to get the chicks to hug you. That was a perfectly acceptable reason to do so, Nick. Chuck in a few tears, get the chicks to cuddle you. Job's a good one. This wasn't what this was about.
Was that your tactic, Paul? Fake crying, and then so a woman will touch you.
I'd have to just fall over in the street.
That wasn't anyone's strategy.
It was mine. If I fall over in the street, they've got to look me in the eye and potentially help me up.
Acknowledge my existence. I see.
Exactly. Yeah. So I pause with this because it's utterly ridiculous. You'd think that on a podcast by two comedic chaps that we could make something like this up, and it wouldn't be plausible, but everyone would have a little bit of a giggle about it. But this actually happened at the Munich Defense Security Conference, and whenever I see people like that, I just look at the men stood behind him. And I mean this metaphorically. I mean the Alistair Campbells. I mean the Rory Stewarts. I mean the James O'Briens. I mean every male Labour MP that's come out. By the way, you haven't heard much from any women on this at all. And, I'm happy to be proved wrong in the comments, but hardly any women have come out and spoke against this. I think they seem to. Women of all different political bents have stood back and gone, what the fuck is going on here? This is mental.
Yeah. Yeah, I just found on Twitter as well, because I mentioned that. I hadn't seen anyone else mention that about the applauding, but Yoram Hazoni did. He said the chair of the Munich Security Conference starts crying and can't finish his speech. The Europeans start applauding. What are they applauding? A display of oversensitivity and weakness. Men whose job is defending nations can't afford displays of oversensitivity and weakness. It destroys deterrence. It causes wars. These Europeans are applauding their own downfall. Hard to argue with that, Paul.
It is. And it's, this isn't a question. I mean, go see Dixon Cox go mental for sensitivity. But this isn't a question about sensitivity of men. This is a question about strong leaders of any sexual orientation, of which there are only two. This is just about how this is a time for strength. There isn't anyone in Putin's government, right, who's crying. They're not crying. They're just standing, they're defending their country, they're defending their principles. And we might hate that. We might hate their country, we might hate them, we might hate their principles. But they're showing strength to their people. This shows no strength to anybody. I mean, Jade, I urge people, I've put it on my Twitter today, actually. I've actually shared the White House's YouTube channel version of the J.D. Vance video. I urge anyone to watch it. Please tell me what you're upset about. If you're upset, please tell me what you're upset about. Because there's nothing in there that's a lie. And th- they are the core principles from which we must have a foundation for any strong leadership. And that's collaboratively across the Western world as well. I just don't see what the problem is. I think it's fantastic that we have free speech. J.D. Vance was essentially saying, if you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. I respect that.
Mm.
That's it.
And just no one knows this guy's name. It's Christoph Hesgen. I don't know how you pronounce his
Oh, is
German
this the
names.
director?
Yeah, it's just that he's just known as the crying bloke. But what he was saying, he began his speech after the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday. We have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Wrapping up, the chairman started, let me conclude, and this becomes difficult. But no summarizing sentences were to come as Husgen, however you say it, teared up and was able to continue. This is in The Spectator. While his audience applauded and hugged the conference chair, Mrs. S. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah. Mr. S will point out that, how do you say his name? It's annoying me. This guy, anyway, has not always been so. Anyway, it goes on and on. It That's the madness of it. He really was just saying, I don't, Vance, we're saying he's not friends with Europe anymore. I just cried because of it.
He didn't even say that, did he? This is the point, you see. If you are good friends with somebody and you question choices they've made, turns they've taken that seem to have been vastly different than what the whole friendship was predicated on in the first place, you have every right as a good friend to question it and say, look, we seem to have lost our way a little bit here. Your principles are changed. We're returning to our principles that we all signed up to in the first place, particularly in the wake of the Second World War. So what we're asking of you now is, why have you done this? And can you not see the damage it's causing to you internally? Because if you want us to continue to support you, particularly with military and financial support, you need to understand that we cannot legislate for you damaging yourself on a daily basis. You
Hmm.
need to own your problems. You need to own your shit, Europe. That's all he's saying. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Okay. I agree. I think we're just going to agree on that. So I think we may as well move on. And I'm not sure exactly how long we've done because we had a slight technical hitch. But I think maybe we'll squeeze in one more story for the good people on YouTube, which is this Ashley St. Clair thing. I don't know how much you followed it. So she posted on X 5 months ago, I welcomed a new baby into the world. Elon Musk is the father. I have not previously disclosed this to protect our child's privacy and safety, but in recent days, it has become clear that tabloid media intends to do so, regardless of the harm it will cause. I intend to allow our child to grow in a normal and safe environment. For that reason, I ask that the media honor our child's privacy and refrain from invasive reporting. So, lots of people have been defending Ashley because, of course, lots of people are friends with her, and I have mutual friends with her. I don't necessarily want to have a big pop at Ashley about this, but some people have questioned, was she really pregnant at the time? There's been all sorts of things. Some people have said, how come you've come out and done a spread with the New Yorker, I think it is, when you were just saying you didn't want attention, but apparently she's done that to get ahead of it because it was going to come out anyway, and so on. Even made the front page of the Mail. I've had Elon's secret 13th baby, says Trump cheerleader. So sort of a big story. But and people are talking about Musk. They're doing like charts of Musk's kind of legacy. He's made jokes about relating to Genghis Khan. Brett Weinstein's come out with a quite interesting take that in evolutionary terms, Musk's strategy isn't actually very good, and the technical reasons why that's the case. But I'm not sure if Musk cares about that, actually. In some ways, it's about the birth rate, but I think it might just be that he acts like a warlord and just thinks, I just want loads of kids. I'm not sure it's actually about genes or if it's just an instinctive warlord energy. One thing I thought was quite funny was Ashley St. Clair was accused of sort of having been aiming for this for a long time. People found tweets from 2021 and 2023 of her talking about Musk and in a sort of trying to bag Musk sort of way, that she said she was joking. But there's a tweet from 2020 where she says, I just want a husband, 2 kids, and a small farm already. Well, she's got the 2 kids now. She hasn't got the husband. The farm she'll probably get, Paul, but it will be in South Africa. And that can go awry. That can go awry. Did you have
Certainly,
any
she's.
take on this madness? I know it's more sort of a silly story to end on.
Well, I didn't know who Ashley Sinclair was before this weekend. You brought her to my attention, and then, of course, uh, the story broke. and she's had Elon Musk's baby. It happened over Valentine's weekend. Not something that's, I don't think people would consider particularly significant, but it might have been to her. She might not have been getting the attention from Elon Musk that she felt she deserved, and it might have just been a ploy to try and get his attention once again. It can't be easy. I mean, you imagine getting pregnant by the richest guy in the world. You'll be thinking, "Here we go. That's me done. I'm quitting the day job.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave the leisure centre and get a David Lloyd membership." That's what I'd be thinking. But
And it is like that. We'll go into that how she actually lives now. But carry
so
on.
so I would say that. But let's not take away the humanity of this. Okay, so Elon Musk is some. I'm not sure that he is trying to repopulate the world in some way because he's wealthy and he can. I think he's just a randy git that sometimes has some time on his hands. He's going to by the very nature of being the richest man, one of the richest men in the world, etc. He's going to attract lots of people. Lots of attractive people are going to want his attention in more ways than they would ever have done if he wasn't the richest man in the world. Let's face it, and that applies to people of all looks. In today's particularly Western society, billions of pounds means guaranteed sex. And I guess there's an element of sort of the man within me, and there isn't a man within me, Nick. I know what you're thinking. That okay, he's entitled to fill his boots. He's not married, but the
I'm not sure
humanity
it's
of this.
his boots he's been filling. Carry
Yeah,
on.
he's been, and she's kind of left now, and she's a single parent with one baby from the richest man in the world, and I assume she's being looked after, Nick. I know you have the inside track on this, but I assume she's being looked after. It feels to me like she's come out and she's trying to grab attention. My hunch is that she's trying to get his attention rather than anything else, and that he's very busy playing with other children in the Oval Office, which is not a lot of things you can say. Not a lot of times you say that when you're talking or referring to absent fathers.
Yeah, well, she did seem to try and get his attention. And this was in the New York Post that she did this piece, not the New Yorker, sorry. And she said, Elon, we've been trying to communicate for the past several days and you've not responded. When are you going to reply to us instead of publicly responding to smears from an individual who just posted photos of me in underwear at 15 years old? She wrote on X. I think that was in reply to Milo, who's been posting a lot about it. And then Musk said, whoa, in reply to that. And she's like, what are you doing? And so she keeps trying to get in touch with him. That was the weird thing. Was reading about how she lives in this expensive apartment he pays for and everything, and it's all paid for. But she couldn't tell anyone. She allegedly couldn't do her normal sort of life. I'm just trying to find the bit, but basically, it's basically a gilded cage where she's living in this apartment, kind of isolated. Musk impregnates you, then he gives you loads of money. You live in some apartment. You can't tell anyone, and it really does sound like a sort of gilded cage. But then maybe lots of people would settle for that because it is
I
very
wouldn't.
gilded.
I'm not a woman, and not planning to become one either. But I just wouldn't. I don't think either party in this comes out particularly well. It's quite clear from a psychological perspective. Both of them are filling voids of some kind. Okay, she's been able to do it by having a relationship with the richest man in the world, and of course that he's too busy doing stuff. He's not settling down with anyone. He quite clearly is just out there haphazardly doing absolutely everything that he wants to do. That's the way it feels to me. One thing Elon Musk is ruthless in terms of efficiency, which is why he is in the job, why he's heading up Doge. Okay, this you probably wouldn't want to have a relationship with this man unless it was a business relationship, or B, you'd employed him to make your business as one of the most efficient businesses in all the world. I.e., that's exactly what Trump's doing. I'm sure Trump sometimes sits back and thinks, "Whoa," because there is always a slight element of chaos, I think, with Elon Musk. And I think the same for her as well. A beautiful woman, absolutely beautiful woman. Where's this lever now? She'd be much better off having an average Joe that loves her to bits, will look after the children, maybe can't give her the gilded cage that she's now stuck in, but will give her a much happier life. We all know that money and trapping and fame and media and all this stuff, it serves no real purpose. It only has short-term benefits, Nick.
Well, Musk didn't even want to put his name on the birth certificate. But Paul, you see, you're being naive because women don't want that thing you've described. It's hypergamy. I mean, I don't want to get back into kind of the manosphere world here, but it's well known that women now they want the best they want the best resources they can get. They see a man who's got all the resources in the world, and they instinctively go for that. It's hardwired into them. They want the best possible resources, but those men famously aren't going to treat them very well, and then they get all upset. And this just repeats. They're going for the top few percentage of men, and those men have so many options now. They can have 13 children, and this is the Pareto distribution of the global dating marketplace. It's known as. So that's what we're seeing here. And everyone's unhappy in this arrangement, except basically Elon Musk. That's basically
Yeah.
what you end up with.
But I would.
One bloke gone.
Do you think he is happy though, Nick? I mean,
With this
there'll be
arrangement, I
people
mean, with
that
this
yeah,
arrangement, because
yeah.
he gets the top percentage man gets to do what he wants. The woman's unhappy because she wants more attention than that man is willing to give. The majority of men are unhappy because they're excluded from the whole game. And so in this Pareto distribution, you end up with like 10 blokes at the top just doing what they want. One of them is Musk. He's kind of, you could say he's the ultimate because he's the richest man in the world. They're not necessarily the best looking. And she must be hoping that the kid gets the brains and not the body. What were you going to say though, Paul?
No, I do question both their happinesses actually, but like you say, the arrangement probably works well for Musk. I think when you are the richest man in the world, that you don't have the complications that you do if you and I just continually got 15 different women pregnant. That would be very expensive. It's not an issue for him. He can his money enables him to carve space away from these people to go and do it again, no doubt. But I think it's kind of a dire insight into the life or the worst of the Western world's trappings for me. I'm not.
It's not that Western though, is it, to have like loads of children? Isn't that a bit more?
No, but what I mean is celebrity, money, and fame of what attracted these two people to. Certainly her to him, and she's a beautiful woman, and
You
it
sound
just
like Dan
seems to.
Wootton. That's not going to help you, Paul, to keep saying
She's a
that.
beautiful woman. No, I don't. I feel very untethered, very detached from this as a not just as a story, as a couple. It's not the sort of thing that
You
I
don't spend
find.
enough time on the internet.
No, a bit more than that. I just think that none of that interests me in the sense that he can behave how he wants and she can behave how she wants. But if in her desperation to get his attention, it's been drawn to my attention, and I just feel compassion and pity for the situation, particularly her.
Well, you're a nice guy. The debate on the conservative online types was, should we celebrate this because it's a baby and of course you don't want to abort it? Or is it a single mother and therefore terrible? Is it a gold digging single mother? And other people are saying, well, it's our friend and
Nothing
blah,
wrong
blah.
with single mums.
So I don't even get into all of that. But Brett Weinstein had an interesting take. He says, who knows what is really in Elon's mind, but what he's doing with all these women bearing his children is not evolutionarily sophisticated, if that is even his aim. By the way, I just want to interrupt there and say, someone said that Musk, the strangest thing about this is it proves Elon Musk has had sex 13 times. Someone else pointed out, actually, it could be less than that because some of them were test tube babies. So I think Musk, he's all about input and output. He's all about total efficiency. I would be ashamed of Musk if he hasn't tried to absolutely maximize it and maybe had sex like 6 times, done the rest in vitro. You know, if he was going to be true to his Doge credentials, he would try and have the absolute minimum input for the maximum output. But anyway, Weinstein carries on. Yes, it will increase the representation of his genome in future generations to a tiny degree, but if you understood what that does and does not accomplish, I'm pretty sure a guy as smart as Elon would not care. And there was a strong argument that this strategy of his is counterproductive to the things he appears to actually value. The calculus may actually be the opposite for the women in question, who probably think they're getting genius genes and are not, and who would be wise to produce kids with an involved father, but have driven a mediocre bargain and are not, but who are getting security and access for their children that can't be bought at any price. This analysis won't make sense to anyone who got the standard evolutionary lessons in school and came away thinking that reproduction is the same as evolutionary fitness. If that's your model, it's time to level up. So he's going into the technicalities of it, which is beyond me, I have to admit. I was led to believe that at least IQ is 0.8 heritable, meaning of roughly 80%. So, you know, at least they'll get decent IQs. But I don't know, Brett's saying that it's not as simple as all that. But I'm saying I'm skeptical that that is even Musk's. He may have a very sort of broad idea, like, oh, I'm spreading my genes, but I just think it's I don't know what is it. I think it's just like more like warlord behavior, as I said. It's just a kind of instinctive. I can do this. Who knows what
Well, we have
psychological
no
route there may be
idea
to it. We have no idea.
what relationship they had, um, if there was any love involved at any point, Nick.
No, but why does Musk keep wanting to do this with so many women, with and
Well,
have so many
I don't
children?
know if you've had the sexual urges that they talked about in our puberty lessons in year 6, Nick, but men tend to get them, and it kind of, it can drive you to these type of activities, Nick.
Oh, but most men don't, and is that just because they can't afford it? Whereas Musk can afford to just not be careful. Mind
Yeah,
you,
I
I know
think he
people from council estates who've got a large number of children just
same
because they're
same
impulsive.
same thing applies. Same thing when you've got billions and you've got nothing. It's the same thought pattern. You can't lose nothing.
Right.
And if you've got billions and billions, you can't lose billions and billions. If you've got £20,000 worth of savings and 50 grand a year coming in, you can lose absolutely everything if you have 15 kids. So I
Yes.
think the same applies to Gary Bloke
Uh,
and as it does to Elon Musk.
I've spoken to mates of mine and gone like, but did you not think about it? And they're just like, they just don't think beyond the moment. I suppose that's more of a middle class thing, even though I'm probably only lower middle class. But planning, and now I'm a terrible example because I've removed myself from all women because they're evil. But in general, that is a bit of
He
a thing.
doesn't mean
It's
it.
not necessarily a working class thing, but it might be. There's like a lack of forward planning in people who do this. Like you say, at the very top and the very bottom. It's that bell curve thing, isn't it? It's the that meme you always see, the bloke at the bottom just going, "Have loads of kids, yeah, spread seed," and then the midwit is going, I can't afford. Children are too expensive now. How will we pay our more?" And then at the other end, the high IQ genius going, "Have loads of kids." That's weird. It is actually that curve.
This is exactly what it is.
That's so. I didn't realize that. Wow, that's solved then. I suppose you're
Yeah,
right because Andrew
I would
Tate
just
is
say
a
to Ashley, if you're watching, get in touch.
get in touch.
Nick and
Yeah.
I, we perhaps could do some joint fathering for you.
Well, hang on. We just have to do the fathering. We just get the rubbish bit with the nappies and stuff. That's outrageous. No, I'm not. I'm not signing up for that. Um, um, yeah, people. I mean, people mock me. I do get offers from women because of they see me do all this stuff, but I just don't think they're worth it, Paul. I've gone full MGTOW. But it's
You
funny
never
how
know,
Andrew
the right
Tate's
one
at
might
both
come
end of
along.
the scale. When he was poor, he'd have been like having loads of kids. Now he's rich, he's having loads of kids. It's funny how we've cracked that. All right, cool. Not a topic we'd normally talk about, but there it is. I think that's enough for the three people. Don't know quite how long we did because Paul had a weird issue where when he touches his mic, the whole thing blows up.
Just under an hour, I would have thought.
Um, and we've done a decent chunk for the three people. So thank you very much for watching on YouTube. Please leave positive comments. Negative ones will be brutally removed. If you really like what we do, as some of you do, we thank you very much. And go to nickdixon.net for the whole thing. Go to @PaulCoxComedy for Paul's stuff. But for now, for the audio and YouTube people, we will see you again next week.
Goodbye.